I'm Jim Fager with the Greater Louisville Education Cooperative. Joining me today is Dana Collins. Dana is Assistant General Counsel for ECE with Jefferson County Public Schools. Hi, Dana.
Good morning.
Dana, we were going to have a conversation today about meaningful ARC input. So when we talk about meaningful participation or meaningful input, what does that look like?
Well, Jim, sometimes in a meeting, it's a dialogue between an IC and a parent. What I would like to see is more meaningful participation of all members of the ARC so that district staff are giving meaningful input into the ARC meeting and into the decision-making process.
Okay, so it sounds like you're trying to make a distinction then between, say, running a meeting and maybe facilitating a conversation. Why is that distinction so important?
Well, running a meeting, in my mind, is going through a set agenda and checking boxes. Okay, we covered this, we covered this, we covered this. Again, it's one person speaking, one person dictating to the group what we're doing. Facilitating is guiding the group towards decision making, guiding the discussion. You still may want to make sure that the group covers certain topics as the IC, and you also may be guiding them in terms of time frames, things like that. But facilitating a meeting, you're guiding the group and encouraging more open discussion.
You mentioned the group, and I'm glad you made that distinction. I think that's a word that you've chosen very carefully. Oftentimes, when we're in a meeting, an ARC meeting, we're very focused, and rightly so, on ensuring that parents have meaningful input. But I think, as you mentioned, the ARC is important, as important as parents are. They're a member of the ARC, but the ARC itself must all be engaged in this process. Before we jump further down this conversation, I think there's a celebration to be made. I think as a whole, you've mentioned to me, JCPS has made great strides supporting parent input with ARCs. Tell us about that.
Yes, A plus to the district, because I think that ICs are definitely providing parents more opportunities to speak in these meetings, to voice their concerns. They're doing an excellent job of asking questions to make sure that parents understand the content, and also checking in with them along the way throughout the meeting to make sure they can voice their concerns.
Okay, that's important to hear, but there are often other members of the ARC that don't offer input during an ARC meeting. Why do you suppose that occurs?
Sometimes I think that's because, A, if I'm at a meeting, there's probably another attorney who's representing the parent at that meeting, and that makes people nervous. They're afraid, I don't want to say something that's going to create liability for the district. Clearly, this is a contentious situation. They also may think, well, we're talking about a topic today that really doesn't have anything to do with me. We're talking about placement, and I am somebody who works with the child just here and there. So this really doesn't have anything to do with me.
Okay, so considering those factors that may, I guess, prevent or slow people down from participating, what do you wish you could say to those ARC members before a meeting to address these?
I would say trust your expertise and trust yourself. You are there for a reason. Everybody who is present has a role at the meeting, and that means that we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you are either doing with the student, or we want to hear your expertise on the topic if it's someone who doesn't ordinarily work with the student. All of that is really important. Another thing that is important is that, and good for people who are attending ARCs to remember, is that facts are not going to get you in trouble. Certainly opinions are good, but if you're nervous about what you're going to say, you're never going to be in trouble for saying, I worked with this student and this is what we're working on. We reviewed some social stories this week, and these are some topics that we went over, and the student really seemed to respond well to this. This is what we tried in the classroom, and it wasn't all that successful, so we're going to try this. Those are factual statements, and that is the type of input that I want to encourage, and it's not something that's going to cause liability for a district.
That's helpful to hear, and I know that would go a long way in easing me as an ARC member. But for those ARC members that say, well, Dana, that's good to hear, but I don't have a lot of contact with this particular student. Does my contact have to be long to be meaningful, or the ARC meeting itself, does it have to be long to be meaningful?
The answer is no to both questions. Sometimes my favorite statements in an ARC are just anecdotes from a teacher who maybe sees the student once a week, a regular ed teacher who perhaps only sees the student in one class. They might have some observations about how that student is doing, and that I want to know as an ARC participant. Does that student do well in gym, which is a larger setting, which is sometimes kind of noisy? Is that a good setting for that child, or does the child have some difficulties with that setting? So one or two sentences from a teacher who may see a child just here or there, a mental health practitioner who maybe sees a child once a week. What are you working on? You can say, we've been talking about X, Y, and Z, and the student really seems to be responding well. We're really building a good relationship. Hearing something positive like that can really go a long way towards reaching consensus and building relationships with parents. So even a couple of sentences from someone who has very limited contact can be very beneficial.
Last question, Dana. Oftentimes when we're involved with these challenging or even potentially contentious meetings, it could be a bit of I guess, a burden, maybe emotionally, maybe stressful. And we don't want it to be that. I'm confident of that. So what are some strategies that you could propose to ensure that there's meaningful input taking place within an ARC, especially ARCs that you anticipate being contentious?
There are several things. One is, I think you can note as you go along, what are some topics that we agree on? Note that there's consensus on some of the smaller decisions, because that can go a long way when we're making a bigger decision at the end, right? That may be more contentious. Oh, we recognize as a group that we actually agree on a lot of things, and we can come together, and that can go a long way, again, towards building those relationships. Another thing you can do is take a short break. Sometimes that helps, and say, well, we're going to cover X, Y, and Z when we come back. It gets people thinking about, oh, okay, that's something that maybe I could have some input on. But the most important thing is just to make people feel comfortable, have that active communication between ARC members, between yourself and some of the district staff. Make sure that everybody feels listened to, and make sure that they are encouraged to give their input and feel like they are a meaningful part of the ARC process.
Dana Collins, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been a brief conversation, but I think a very enlightening one around meaningful ARC input. We want to encourage you to reach out to Dana if you've got questions, concerns about the legal processes within special education. She's a wonderful resource. Here's another resource that I'd encourage you to consider: supporting the IEP process, a facilitator's guide. Again, I think it's a valuable tool for any person chairing ARCs. So thank you, Dana, for your time. I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you.